Okay, we should be set.
Okay,
All right.
go for it, Kaya.
Okay, I call to order this July 9th meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission. First on our agenda, citizens to be heard. Do we have any comments that were submitted or anyone waiting as a citizen to be heard? Summer.
I think you need to do roll call verbally.
Oh,
There
do
was
We'll
we-
that
do a quick roll call. I
Oh.
have Kaya Marienfeld, Commission Chair, Nora Shepherd, Planning Director, Corey Shirtliff, Assistant Planner, Jessica O'Leary, Commission Member, Luke, I always butcher your last name, Commission Member, Marianne Becknell, Commission Member, and Ruben Villapando Salas, Commission Member.
Wojciechowski.
I'm gonna have to listen to that like 2 or 3 different times so I get it straight.
Luke.
I feel bad every time.
All right. Thanks everyone for being here. Again, our first item on the agenda, citizen to be heard. Do we have anyone present for that, Summer?
No one in the waiting room for that.
And I don't believe we got any emails about anything on or off the agenda this week. So we can go ahead and close that up. Action item number 3 on the agenda, 3.1, review and possible recommendation to City Council of Ordinance 2020-12, approving a zoning map amendment for property owned by James Nelson located at 191 Walnut Lane, amending the split zoned parcel from R2 single family household and 2 household residential zone and R4 manufactured housing residential zone to only R4 manufactured housing residential zone and amending the City of Moab official zoning map. Great.
Perfect. Well, we'll go ahead and jump right in. And you guys will remember this. We reviewed this on April 23rd. So at that commission meeting, we continued this item after we had closed the public hearing until the point the applicant had time to supply the correct updated survey information, which they have now submitted and we're ready to go on. So I'll share my screen and we'll do a quick presentation. Does that show up for everyone all right? Okay. There we go. Alrighty, so this is just that detailed information. Again, this is a lot of the same information we've already covered, but the 191 Walnut Lane, as well as the 288 Walnut Lane with address discrepancy between the application and actual address for the property. This is the address that we're going ahead forward with the rezone on. Property owner James Nelson. The whole property size, this has been amended slightly by 0.02 acres with the amended survey. So prior it was 1.04 acres, now it's 1.06 acres for the rezone that would be within the rezoned portion of it. So that 0.37 was a 0.35 prior from the R2 single household, 2 household residential, and R4 to only R4. This was the plat, is the recorded plat by the county. And this area here was the discrepancy area. Lucas Blake provided this updated survey that has the redefined area from where the recorded parcel boundary is to the whole property boundary there.
Corey, can you sort of maximize that and get rid of the stuff on the side and then maybe zoom in a little bit so we can see it?
Sure. We'll see if I can get. I don't know if I'll be able to.
There. Perfect. Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So again, this block section here, you can see the recorded parcel boundary in the dashed line and then the accurate survey border for the whole parcel there. Updated acreage and square footage for parcel number -0107. Whoop. All right. This is a vicinity map just showing the surrounding zoning. Off to the left, the C2 zoning, the Moab Valley Health property owners, and then R2 along the north border of the property. And then just to the right is the city-owned parcel of the Walnut Lane development area. This has recently been rezoned in ordinance 2020-01 to the R4. So essentially the same rezone that we're seeing now has already been done here. We're just applying it to this parcel here. Just a little comparative map of the current zoning included with the amendment from ordinance 2020-01 to what is proposed here. So you can really see pretty clearly where we're trying to fill in and conclude the discrepancy between the zones and the error there. Within the narrative, the applicant is just wanting to amend the split zone to a single zone. That was the intention he brought in as a part of the narrative. Following the Walnut Lane ordinance, where Planning Commission forwarded a positive recommendation to the City Council, and the City Council approved the ordinance amending the official zoning map. The applicant wants to consolidate the zone on the parcel to a single zone to fix an existing non-conforming use and allow for easier development in the future with a consistent zone throughout the parcel. We realized this discrepancy when we were researching the original application. At that time, Moab City Planning Commission reviewed this item on April 23rd, had their open public meeting, and Planning Commission opened and closed the public hearing during that meeting and continued this item. The applicant did produce an additional survey to determine the exact legal description of the parcel to be rezoned, and requested the zone includes the additional area that's been correctly surveyed within that 0107 parcel. All right, that really is just the quick overview of what we've already discussed last time, and then the updated information. If we would like to discuss, I'll hand it back off to Kaya, or if we do have the applicant in the waiting room and the commission would like to hear from them.
I do not have anyone in the waiting room.
All right, so we have several options on the table. Let me pull them up. I'll just give the options, and then if we want, someone can make a motion, and then we can have discussion based on that motion if that works for everybody. Unless anyone has specific questions following Corey's presentation. I'm going to take that as a no. All right. So we can recommend a positive recommendation to City Council with or without edits, a negative recommendation with specific findings supporting that recommendation, or we can continue or table this to a later meeting, which is what we did last time when this came up because of those small amendments that needed to be made. So if you look at the first PDF attachment on the agenda summary, under recommended motion, there is a recommended motion. If someone would like to forward a positive recommendation, you can make that motion. We can open the floor for discussion after we get a second on that. Oh, there it is too. Great.
I can do that. I move to forward a positive recommendation to City Council for Ordinance 2020-12 based on the findings required by Moab Municipal Code 17.04.060 map amendment approval criteria.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Oh, I heard a couple. We'll just call Jesso as the second. All right, any discussion based on Marianne's motion? All right. We'll call for a vote. Summer, if you want to do the roll call vote.
Yep. Marianne,
Aye.
Ruben.
Aye.
Luke,
Aye.
Kaya,
Aye.
Jesso.
Aye.
I think I got everyone.
All right, motion passes unanimously. Thanks for getting that all ironed out, staff folks. Seems to make good sense. All right, moving along. Future agenda items. What do we have coming up?
Oh, we've got a lot of fun coming up. Actually, we do. We have received sort of a preliminary pre-application for a site plan on the old hospital site. That's pretty interesting. It adds, what it does is it adds some multifamily units kind of on the perimeter of the existing building that would be done sort of in a first and second phase. And then what the applicant, who has been Bird, would like to do is redevelop using some of the superstructure from and infrastructure from the existing building, tearing some parts down and leaving some parts intact, but completely redoing them into into apartment units, not condominiums. And they're apartments that are varied in size. Some of them are pretty small. And the philosophy is that they're smaller. And so the market will automatically, they will be a more affordable unit, but is not proposing deed restrictions at this time. And we just sent this out to our development review team, and they have some utility issues to deal with and some of those kinds of things. But I think, it's on its way. So that will be interesting. I think it's kind of a creative solution to redevelopment. And that, I don't know, it'll probably be a couple meetings before that's ready to come to you, but it'll be a fun one, I think. And then we also, as you probably all read in the paper today, the article was not entirely, the article in the Moab, the TI, was pretty good, but not entirely accurate. But the Lions Back development will be coming back before you. Yeah, that one. Yeah. The Lions Back development, I don't want to talk too much about it, but they have a vested right basically to move forward with the approval that was granted them in 2008 and 2009. What happened, there was a lawsuit that occurred, and the city and Sitla prevailed on that initial lawsuit. Then market conditions kind of tanked in 2008. They came back in 2016 and wanted to reconfigure the hotel. It was like 53 bedroom-ish units that were kind of in a more campus-like setting. And by that time, the market had changed where they wanted to do a 150 room hotel, more consolidated. The staff made a determination that that was a minor amendment and did not take it to the Planning Commission or City Council. There was a lawsuit that ensued, and the plaintiffs, I guess, that's the way the judge went. So basically what that does is it invalidates the 2016-17 revision. So we're back to the original 2008-2009 approval. And I've been working with Chris McEnany, who was our attorney at the time, to kind of go over the existing agreements. And we'll come back to you fairly soon, probably with a work session, because it's really it's confusing and it has a lot of history, most of which is doesn't really matter an awful lot because they do have these vested rights, and that and so we will be moving forward. They will have to come back and do platting for each phase, and that platting will have to go through some kind of a process, probably a public hearing with Planning Commission. At least that's my initial read. So that will be interesting. I'm going to be working with Lisa Church, who is our communications director, to kind of come up with some Q&A sheets about it and some press releases, just so the public understands that we're not starting from scratch. We're starting from an approved invested development agreement, development and phasing agreement. So that's our starting point. Just so you all know that so that will be coming back, and it will be controversial.
Hey, Nora, I have a question about that. Inevitably, you get, when folks know you're on Planning Commission, you get a lot of questions about that project in particular. And I'm curious, so we can make sure that people who do want to be engaged as members of the public are engaging in a way that's effective or the right thing. Is there any way you can sort of give us a little bit of a perspective about what might be those ways that there is still something to be decided, options, or a way that the public can still engage that isn't just don't do the project because obviously you're saying it's vested. So I guess what are the things that are still up for consideration? Kind of broadly, you can say that at this point.
Not much is terribly discretionary because they're not really planning on any changes. The first phase would be not the hotel, but the 34 casitas that were applied for with the first phase. And they're working now on, I've had some phone calls and we're working on what the process is from here. So we're still kind of ironing that out. It will probably be a platting exercise, and which is really an administrative review. And it already has an approved trails plan, an open space plan. And as I mentioned at a meeting soon, once we kind of figure out the direction to go and we all agree on that, is that we will probably come to the Planning Commission with a work session that kind of talks about it, what's vested, what the process is from here. I can't tell you that right now for sure because we just started these discussions. But since I'm sure you have been approached, some of you, we will give you that information as soon as we can. It's fairly complicated, of course. And I know that people either weren't here or they probably hoped it went away. But it is here and it didn't go away. So they have some rights to move forward. Sorry to be evasive, but we still are, I'm still digging through the agreements. What else, Corey? We have there's a little townhouse project that's also been Bird that's on, was it on?
On about 100 east and 300 east, 100 south.
Right.
Just across from the ball fields.
5 or 6 units?
Yeah, 5-unit townhome development.
So you'll see that too as a site plan approval. And it's kind of
also likely have probably a 2-lot minor subdivision coming up as well.
Yeah, right. Which I'm not sure the Planning Commission will even see. It's probably an action by City Council because it's a minor subdivision and the property owner owns the whole parcel. And so that's, but yeah. So we're reviewing that as well. So
Nora, what was the first item you were going over? I kind of got logged in halfway through. You said you were digging through the agreements. Oh, okay.
Yeah. You probably know a lot about that or something about it anyway.
Say that one more time, you broke up.
Okay, I said you probably know something about Lion's Back, Becky.
Yeah. He's been around town for a long time. It seems like he's been working on it for a while.
Yes, since 2002, I think is what he said, but anyway. Okay, that's all I have. Corey, anything else? Okay.
Oh, that's perfect.
All right. We have a discussion item after future agenda items. I'm fascinated to hear about something finally happening at the old hospital, other than old cars getting abandoned there. Or people parking their rigs there when they stay at the Entrada. So first discussion item 5.1, continue discussion on commercial requirements for overnight accommodations in the resort commercial zone.
Okay. So this is a continuing discussion that began a year and a half ago or so. And I included in the staff report some background information, also kind of the latest version or round of proposed amendments to the RC zone, the resort commercial zone that were being proposed. And the goal is to be able, right now, we do not allow new overnight accommodations in any zones in the city. If a property has been used for an overnight accommodation in the past and it was built to really be an overnight accommodation like the Entrada, that use is allowed to continue, but we are not able to grant any new requests for any kind of overnight accommodation, including bed and breakfasts, RV parks, campgrounds, all that. That's all. We've taken all of that out of all of the zones in our code. And so the city council has directed the planning commission to look at a few specific things relating to the draft amendments that were being proposed. I know this is before some of yours time, and I'm happy to go back and show you a PowerPoint presentation that I did previously that kind of shows more of the history if you wish, or we can just kind of launch into this first issue. And what I have proposed that be the first thing that we talk about is during the discussions with both the Planning Commission and the City Council, that real desire was expressed that we require and or incentivize commercial uses above and beyond what we would normally see in a hotel or lodging type property. And so what we're looking at right now is only would apply to new hotels and motels in the resort commercial zone. And maybe I'll show you exactly where that is just for, I'm opening up a PowerPoint, an old PowerPoint, but it will give you some information. Wrong one. Yeah, that's the wrong one. Of course, it's behind my Zoom screen. There it is. This is can you all see that?
No.
Okay, there you go. So this was the PowerPoint that I prepared for the public hearing before the City Council. There was a public hearing. I also included some of the minutes and background information references in your staff report, but this is taking sort of a step back. And it's not even the right one. Well, what we had prepared at that point in time, let me do stop sharing if I can figure it out. This is all minimized, so now I can't get out of it. Weird. Okay. Somewhere I'm kind of stuck. I don't know what to do. Oh, here we go. Stop share. There it is on my other screen. So there are part, and what we're talking about the RC zoning is it's on the north part of town. Some of the commercial development there is in the C4 or our general commercial zone, and other is in the RC or the resort commercial. And we decided to start with the resort commercial zone because it seemed most appropriate, because that's kind of what the zone was created for. We have not seen an awful lot of pressure about this at this point in time. You know, we get people who call and ask periodically, but we don't have anybody that's really breathing down our neck right now. I think part of that has to do obviously with what's going on in the world. And part of it has to do with last year, the occupancy rates in the hotels and motels were down slightly. So it may be that our supply has caught up with some of the demand. And so there's a little bit less demand than there probably was previously, just because of market conditions. And the price of the raw ground is now gone pretty high, so that it's tough to develop and make the numbers work with the higher property values. But so we've been looking at putting back in some allowance for hotels and motels under certain conditions. Quite a bit of time had gone by, and so we went to the Planning Commission in a joint work session with the Planning Commission. We only had 3 planning commissioners there, so we didn't have a quorum. But at that meeting, I wanted to reaffirm the City Council's commitment on moving forward with the overnight accommodation standards, and they directed us to continue working on them, and again directed us to specifically look at mixed use and encouraging commercial, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, energy efficiency requirements, and what we are proposing is feasible as drafted. Some additional clarification on definitions of civic space and open space, and also numbers, and then some on building and project size. And I've included the draft language in your staff report on pages 5 and 6 that talks about mixed use, and it talks about building height. And the reason that those 2 things are involved is because when I drafted this, the latest draft indicated that a minimum of 5% of a total square footage of an overnight accommodation had to be in commercial uses in the building on site. And that's fairly typical. That covers things like whether it's a restaurant or whether it's a grab and go or whatever it is, and then sundry shops and those kinds of things, which are typically associated with hotels and motels. That's the number usually runs about 5%, just in the way things work out. And the way we structured it was that if a developer wanted to provide more commercial uses in association with the hotel, whether it be inside or on the same site and immediately adjacent to a proposed hotel, that they could get additional square footage of overnight accommodations and an additional story of height. The height that's being proposed right now, overall, the baseline height is 2 stories. And the incentive would allow 3 stories if they were providing 20,000 square feet of commercial space, for example, on their site, which is kind of the size of, it would be a large convenience store probably. That's probably 15,000. So a little bit bigger than that, but not a huge, not like a grocery store or anything like that. I would say that the city market is probably about 40,000 square feet. So 35, 40, just to give you an idea on scale. And so they'd get additional square footage and additional building height. So my questions for you tonight are laid out on page 6. Should we up the requirement for a minimum required commercial space up from 5%? Does the idea of providing incentives in terms of square footage and building height, does that make sense to encourage additional commercial uses? If we are looking, and then also what kind of commercial would we be looking for? And what we had talked about originally was looking for things that would, 1, reduce traffic. So perhaps such small market, convenience store kinds of things to serve the people that are staying out there so they don't have to come into town every time they want any little thing. And then there are also some uses that either don't exist in town or want a slightly bigger presence, that there's really nowhere to put them right now. And the market hasn't provided a niche. So these would be smaller kinds of maybe incubator uses, or, you know, like a commercial kitchen that people can come in and sort of do a shared space, maybe an open air market in the shoulder seasons or in the summer. So something that would serve both the people that stay out there and provide an opportunity for smaller entrepreneurs to actually move forward and have a business that's brick and mortar, that is actually a building. So that's what we had talked about previously. So that is really what I wanted to talk to you about tonight and get a read from you, whether you think commercial requirements should be mandatory, what it should be if it's mandatory, is it worth doing the incentives for, or should we just up the minimum requirement? And if we're going to do that, what are some of the square footages that we're talking about? And what kinds of commercial uses make the most sense? Okay. As I talk about square footages, I can tell you that what was the latest that was proposed from the Planning Commission that was recommended to City Council was looking at a maximum base square footage of 20,000 square feet per building and 40,000 square feet for an entire parcel of overnight accommodations. So that is what the Planning Commission recommended. The county has actually approved similar kinds of development standards, but they did it with an overlay zone, which gives the county council discretion where to apply it and where not to. The route we have decided to go is just in each zoning district explain what's allowed and what's not, so that it's not a sort of it doesn't become a beauty contest where, oh, well, we think this is pretty, so we're okay with applying it here. And so it's more straightforward and people actually have an expectation, a reasonable expectation of what they can do with their property. So with that, I would entertain any comments and discussion.
If anyone has any comments, feel free. We don't need to have it be formal, just chime on in.
I kind of lost you a little bit. I was trying to get my computer on. But I think everything we've discussed in the past seems good. I don't think we need to increase the minimum square footage. And I like the idea of the incentive. If they do more multi-use commercial space on the ground floor, that they get an extra height. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I still like that idea too in this particular zone. I don't think it's necessarily appropriate in other zones, certainly, you know, Main Street where we're talking something totally different. I do remember council having some opposition to 3 stories at all ever, period. Am I imagining that? This has been
It was a little mixed. But I think in general, they like 2 stories, but there may be instances where, you know, if they're giving us something that we want as a community to grant that additional square footage. I don't think they said no to that. I think they just wanted the Planning Commission to look at it more and make a recommendation to them.
So Mark, refresh my memory in that are we basing it off of a footprint then? So if somebody wanted a larger footprint and only 2 stories, would the incentive still apply?
It would, if it's just additional square footage. And as I mentioned, it could be as even a separate building that's on the same site. So they'd, you know, some of these parcels are pretty big. They have to be a minimum of 2 acres, but some of them are fairly large and could easily accommodate a hotel, and another kind of commercial use or hub or something. And we've actually talked to a couple of the developers that still own property out there, and they kind of like that idea, and are not necessarily opposed to it, and think that adding some commercial out there is probably not a bad idea. When push comes to shove and the rubber meets the road, who knows how they'll feel about it, but at least there was some interest in the concept.
Yeah, I mean, I like incentives. We have limited space footprint wise. There are certain areas where it makes sense to be a little higher. You know, the new hotel there is already blocking the sun, so I'm just kidding.
I know. And blocking the portal and everything else. And you know, one of the development standards that we talked about too is increasing the setback from the highway right away, so that we don't get that wall, like we got
It's
with
just a weird situation where I think just the height and where it happened to be, it ended up being very, I think, different than a lot of folks anticipated, for sure. So not faulting anyone. I'm just commenting every time I drive by. I'm like, wow.
That is a huge project. And
Yeah.
what we're talking about here is nowhere near that scale.
Correct. No, I think, I mean, you know, my whole spiel is like, yeah, and if you do a third story, make sure your roof is solar or your roof is, you know, green, you're growing food for your in-house restaurant or something like that. I mean, these are all like little nitpicky things, but it'd be awesome to see if people looking out at the rooftops from Main Street or from North 191 were seeing green stuff instead of seeing, you know, other things. That'd be cool.
That is a good point.
But no, I like, and it sounds like, you know, the business owners or potential developers that you've talked to like that idea too. And this is all about, you know, I think all of us have agreed this is about not just preventing things we don't want. If anything, it's getting things we do. And if there's a way we can make that feasible, I think that's nice. And I think we have the most wiggle room in this zone just because of its sort of designated purpose and kind of what's already going on out there too.
And what these regulations do is they manage a developer's expectations. I mean, you know, when somebody is looking to buy a piece of property, they look at the price tag, they look at sort of the maximum potential development on the site and decide if they can make the numbers work. And if we lower that expectation for sort of maximum developable square footage, then that will, you know, temper what their expectations are, and therefore they can make decisions based upon that information rather than having the whole thing, you know, having another world mark. I mean, we definitely don't want another project that big right now. So.
I do have a question regarding the 5% like commercial space. What like triggers them being allowed to build extra like housing like above that 5%?
Oh yeah, that's the other thing. I did add something in there about in addition to commercial, the other incentive could be that they could build affordable housing above and beyond what they are already required under our requirement for affordable housing under the WAHU. It already requires either the construction of units or contribution to a affordable housing fund. Most of the hotels that we've seen develop since we put in the WAHU have chosen to pay the money. And we may be relooking at that to try to incentivize actual construction on site more than just the money. I mean, we need the money for Walnut Lane and other things, but it would also be nice to have additional employee housing where they work. And again, that would be a traffic mitigating strategy. So it would be either commercial or the employee housing, which would be subject to deed restrictions. The council had a little bit of a mixed read on that. Some of them felt commercial was more important than employee housing. I mean, everybody thinks employee housing is important. There's no doubt about it, but you know, some felt where we are is, these smaller commercial spaces that entrepreneurs can use are an important incentive. But we could do either or, and then we'd have to work on sort of crank out those numbers. What would 2 additional employee housing units get you in terms of square footage? And we certainly could delve into that further if you think we should include that as an incentive for additional building height and additional square footage.
I don't really think we should go any taller. I'm okay with going beyond the minimum square footage or beyond the maximum square footage that we're outlining. I think housing is really important, and if we can have on-site housing, that's excellent. Another requirement that I just wanted to double check on is that we have kind of porosity to the main street and to the new bike path that's going in consideration of where the new bike path is going and what it will actually connect to in the hotel. And then we discussed having alternate forms of transportation, shuttles, bicycles, scooters, things like that. And because it was really difficult to tell people exactly what they needed to have at their hotel, I think we took that out. But it's worth reconsidering each hotel having an alternative form of transportation other than walking or personal vehicle.
Where we ended up on that, Marianne, and that's a really good question, is what's in the proposed standards right now is they have to provide a space and accommodation for a shuttle stop. So in the future, when we are looking at a shuttle, the infrastructure will be all there. And we're requiring either on-site bicycles, whether they be electric bikes or regular bikes, to be available for their guests, which, some of the bike shops might complain about that because then we're trying to compete with the private sector, but it's important. And then some secured bike storage area so that when people come and they don't want to leave their bikes on their car, they actually have somewhere that they can lock it into a secure place. So as the transportation provisions are currently drafted, those things would be required. So we backed off a little because we don't have a mechanism right now to really provide a shuttle. It's a pretty big long-term operational cost that the city doesn't have the money for, especially now. But we're hoping at some point in the future that we'll be able to kind of get back up on our feet and be able to spend time and energy on that. The other thing that's going on, and you guys may not even really know about this, is UDOT has funded a regional transportation plan for Moab and the Spanish Valley. It's called an RTP for short, Regional Transportation Plan. And the result of that is that if we ever want to get funding from UDOT for any projects in the future, it pretty much has to be in that RTP. So in the Regional Transportation Plan, we will include things like on our wish list, like shuttles and bike paths and things like that. UDOT generally will not fund ongoing operation. There are some federal grants that would often do it for like a limited period of time. But if it is in our Regional Transportation Plan that's part of the wish list, then it makes us eligible to receive various kinds of funding. And that whole process will come to the public here in the next few months. Right now, it's just being kind of mulled over by our steering committee, which is pretty representative of various sections of the public and business community.
And
it's
then,
all pieces.
yeah, I am very in support of doing public business space in exchange for maybe additional hotel rooms. I think it should be mandatory. I think it should be part of the development to have business space that can be made available for the public. But I think we need to do a little bit of extra thinking of what that actually looks like, how big it is, where it is located on the site, and who is able to rent it out, so that we do end up with things that our community actually needs, like places to cook food, commercial kitchens, places to sew, repair clothing. I mean, we don't have a seamstress in town officially. We also need laundromats. So we'll have to decide what goes in that zone. And I think, Nora, you already know a little bit about how you would build that zone out, but we do need to kind of build that from scratch.
Right. And that's why, that's why what kinds of uses would we either require as a minimum or incentivize? What kinds of uses those would be? Even in restaurants, perhaps. We talked about requiring a greater square footage early on. We talked about requiring like 20% square footage within the building as a minimum requirement. And many of the hotel operators had indicated to us that if they're forced to build a restaurant, they don't make money on it. It's usually just sort of an amenity that they provide. And that they would hate to build space that then sits empty because nobody wants to come in and provide those services. So we have to be careful about scale and size and really do something that's making sense. What do other people think about the building height issue? I mean, what we could do is right now we don't really have a visual analysis requirement. And, we could certainly look at whether the incentive can be additional height or whether it has to be just additional square footage with 2 levels based upon a view shed analysis. And we have actually identified the Moab Rim, the portal, and some of those things as being priorities for our view shed. Of course, the portal's kind of gone, but we don't want and it may be that on one side of the road where the property drops off, there may be, you may be able to have a 3-story structure that you really can't see much. Archway Inn is kind of a good example. I think most of it's only 2 stories, but it's, it's separated from the road by that frontage road, which is also a strategy that we could recommend if we feel that's a good idea. And then a setback beyond that, so that the buildings are quite a ways away from the highway and they're lower. So there are some cases where I think on the downhill side, we might be able to allow increased building height without it really impacting the view tremendously. On the other hand, once you get down lower, you get into wetlands. So there's a little sweet spot right there where it may make a difference. On the uphill side, you could argue that there's the rim behind, and so 3 stories is, you have the rim in the background, so it's not as impactful as on the other side. Other people would argue that that would tend to block more of the Moab Rim, and therefore we shouldn't even consider it on the uphill side of the street. So there's sort of 2 trains of thought there. And I'm just kind of wanting to hear from you all about how you feel about maximum building height and the potential to go to 3 stories as an incentive.
I think initially, when I saw the idea of having incentivized building height additions, I was against that. Just like Marianne said, especially like square footage wise, or like letting them have more hotel rooms. But that does sound tricky, especially I think I'm in favor of keeping them, like if you were to be on the mountain or the hillside, whatever you call it, I would be in favor of not even allowing height restriction or additional height, because it does remove a lot of it.
So you mean on
the other side?
You mean on the uphill side?
On the uphill side, yeah. I was wondering, I was looking over, and then I was looking at the minutes that were on, the minutes that were posted on the agenda, Exhibit B. And it said that beforehand, the maximum total project square footage was 60,000. When did that get lowered to 40?
Through planning commission discussions.
Okay.
And I don't know if you were here when we started looking at relative building sizes, and we did that sort of photo thing to get a sense of scale. And that's when we had talked about limiting total square footage to 40,000 square feet. Some of the council members may want to go a little bit bigger. The county went to 50, but to 20,000 square feet in a single building, because that's also part of the issue. You know, some of those hotels we looked at were just massive, big one building. And the things that we seem to like better tended to be split up more, a little bit more of a campus-like setting, and lower profile. And Marianne, back to your question about porosity and relating to the public realm. We have some language in there. I certainly think we can strengthen it, especially now that the highway widening is actually happening and we have a better sense for where all that stuff is going. And I think that, you know, we talked at some point about requiring a 5% civic space or contribution to a fund or something else. And then we started talking about what is civic space and how do we define that? How do we enforce it? And, you know, we certainly could do that additionally if, you know, and dig a little bit deeper into that if you think that's something that that we want to look at a little bit more.
I like that.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
It's a matter of putting it into words and making it work. That's the difficult piece of that. And who maintains, and, you know, if there's like a fee in lieu, how does that get determined about what it's going to use? And then we talked about public art and the option of them either putting public art or contributing to a fund. And I still think that's something that we want to consider. And, you know, I think the more we can incentivize public art or require public art, I think the better. Again, logistics are a little bit tricky, but for public art, I don't think it's impossible. It gets a little bit more complicated when we're actually talking about civic space and whatever that is.
What would make public art? I'm assuming that's like you have a certain amount of spaces that are going towards community or like local artists, and, you know, these are the people who are going there. What would make that?
What would, I missed that.
Like just getting that involved and saying this is the open space. You guys have to require this many, I mean, I don't know, square footage or this many spots in the civic space towards
Public
this
art.
many pieces of art.
Yeah, we'd have to define, you know, exactly.
The defining process.
And it's so subjective. You know, art is really subjective. That it gets a little bit tricky, but we have a pretty aggressive public art program, and we have a group that can prioritize sort of what public art we need and what we don't really have, and various different things that they strive for. So we could do, you know, we could certainly dig into that more deeply.
So I would say I'm in agreement, I think, with most everyone, where my preference is for 2 stories. And I would consider 3 under the 2 conditions. 1, that the bottom story is all commercial, and that 2, the view shed is maintained.
Okay. I mean, certainly there'd have to be something on the bottom level, like a check-in desk and things like that. There would have to be some basic.
Right, but if it's an additional building, then the bottom story would all be commercial and the top stories rooms or whatever, but yeah.
Okay.
How would you go about the difference of additional square footage versus a height? Because height is like, I mean, you had 1 story and that's plus 50% of what you had before.
Yeah, but if one building can only be 20,000 square feet.
Okay.
An additional story is an additional 10,000 square feet. And the way it's drafted right now is You could get that if you provide 10,000 square feet of additional commercial on site or in the building.
Okay.
So it'd be square foot for square foot.
Yeah, if we do that, I mean, it sounds like the preference for everyone is that it's 2 stories, but which is why we need it to be a real, I think, incentive. Our preference being 2, we are actually making sure we're actually getting something, if we're getting something that's outside of, I think, what the preference of a majority of the commission is, so.
How many developable parcels are there left in RC?
Well, that's what I was just looking up.
Maybe 3.
Yeah, I believe there are 4 vacant parcels and then some potential for redevelopment. But yeah, there's a particular map. Norm might beat me to it.
Yeah, I'm looking for it.
I think it's a good idea to offer an additional story going up 3 stories if they're going to provide that first story of multi-use commercial. I think you could get creative with it and make, it's 2 stories until you get to this certain setback, and then you can bump up to 3, but prior obviously to the floodplain. Would the first story multi-use commercial, I mean, like, does the whole thing have to be multi-use commercial, or what about mechanical rooms and things like that? Like, how are they to design?
Those are just usually part of a building design. There we go. Thank you, Corey. I was getting there. So Corey, do you want to kind of go over this a little bit? He created this really cool graphic.
Sure thing. My computer, I've lost a few things, so it might take me a second. Everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
And everyone can see this?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, the parcels selected here, those are our vacant parcels as well as the tramway, which we subdivided earlier in 2019. So in theory, there are what you could call 5 with 1 redevelopment with the tramway. This Grand County parcel really isn't developable. It's entirely cliff, essentially. And then this little section here is locked off from access, and the property owners at Moab Springs Ranch really don't have any desire in opening access at this point. And this Palladium Foundation is out of the city limits, but just noted that that's required open space.
It's under a conservation easement.
Correct.
By a private property owner. So it's those blue ones. And the reason that we added the 2-acre minimum is that some of those parcels, so then some of those parcels can't be subdivided to create 2 smaller hotels. But the existing, like that, there's one that's 1.52. If it's an existing lot of record, then they could go ahead and move forward because they have a legal lot of record. But we wouldn't allow subdivisions into smaller parcels than 2 acres for purposes of overnight accommodations. Other than that, there's not a lot. The blue parcel, that's where the tramway is. Last year, we had a developer that actually submitted a site plan idea for that, along with the subdivision and it primarily involved a little bit more commercial space on down below, and then something more up above, like a restaurant or something like that. It wasn't like this huge, massive commercial development down below. But that they never moved forward with that, and I'm sure it has to do with market conditions and what happened. And then the balance of the pieces is Salt Lake Accommodations. And we talked with the Salt Lake Accommodations a little bit about the idea of both commercial and hotels being on one parcel, and they kind of like that idea. So And then on the other side, there are like 4 parcels. So there's a maximum of 6 parcels that could be developed.
I will also mention the Western Rivers Expedition lot down here in the most southern corner of the RC has had some activity and is essentially posturing for sale for a redevelopment. So a lot of the lot has been cleared, the A-frame's been removed, and I believe the owner is getting ready to sell that parcel. So we've had some developers calling in asking about that parcel as well. So potentially 7.
Is that over 2 acres? Probably.
It'll be pretty close, but yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to double check.
Okay. Yeah, so that could potentially be another one. Of course, right now they can't apply for it, but.
Right.
And then are we doing any incentives if anyone just wants to create like another RV park or camping facility? What if they just want to put tents all over their 2 acres? What are we doing if that happens?
We have not gotten there yet. All we're dealing with is this very limited hotels, motels in the RC zone. The county adopted standards for additional RV and campgrounds, and there's maximum sizes that they can add. Many of our RV parks are doing improvements to make them better, but they are not being allowed any additional hookup sites or spaces. We hope in the future, more people, there's one developer that really they do a lot of RV parks all over the West anyway. And they have been busily buying up some of these RV parks that are older and pumping a bunch of money into them so that they will be nicer facilities. Some of them, instead of a hookup site, they're doing a little mini small home thing. But they can't add any additional units right now. When we get to the point where we can start talking about those, then we can talk about, you know, how many additional hookups they would be able to do, and they also are being required to hook up to the new sewer that's out there and into city water and some of those kinds of things, just to clean them up, because most of them are right on the wetlands and have had septic systems and well water that has been a little sketchy. So we're requiring that as a part of their upgrades that they're working on, and nothing in our existing taking our existing code amendments that take the overnight accommodations out of the RC zone. There's nothing in there that says they can't do improvements as long as they don't add additional units or spaces. And we may want to keep it that way, or we may want to allow additional, if it's set back from, most of them are set back from the highway quite a ways, at least 50 feet or so, because there's a driveway back and then they open up, which seems to be a good model. And I think they like them because it provides some privacy and some noise attenuation from the highway. So what kinds of commercial uses do you think we need to incentivize?
Or donut shops.
Grocery stores.
Yeah, restaurants, grocery stores, small retail.
I like that laundromat too.
Yep.
Doggy daycare.
Isn't that the truth? Our person decided to stop doing it and we're at a total loss as to what to do.
Oh no.
I know. It is, we just board them there when we go away for the weekend, but they loved it. Awful. Anyway, laundromat. And then we had mentioned
Art studios.
seamstress. I'm sorry, what was that?
Art studios.
Art studios. They
Yeah,
could even do
I wanted our little painting place. That was cool. Wish we still had one of those. I mean, there's no way to I think, prejudice certain businesses, but man, do we have enough rental places at this point? There's like 15 that popped up this year. There's so many.
So do you mean like outfitters?
No, like moto rental, UTV, ATV, Jeep, stuff like that, which there's just a ton now. I like woke up and I feel like there were 10 more on South Main Street. It was kind of crazy. It happened over the winter.
Yeah, until we can pass a noise ordinance.
Well, that's not
I
within
don't
our
want to see
purview.
any more Jeep rental, razor rental places.
Just noting how many there seem to be now, not that there's a certain business that does or doesn't belong here. No, I think anything in that, the more it can serve the wider community, the better, but obviously understanding that located on site of an overnight accommodation, there's likely, it's unlikely it will be something that doesn't have some sort of bearing on guests that are staying there, so.
Right. Yeah, but certainly not allowing UTV rentals is something that I think we can legislate.
Oh.
You can't say you can't rent Jeeps, but you can rent Hummers. I mean, that kind of distinction we can't make, but it's definitely could be sort of a land use category.
Yeah, I definitely don't think there should be any incentives provided for that sort of business when our goal is to provide commercial that benefits not just the visitors, but also the locals.
And I think
Because we want to get, in return for those incentives, we want to actually gain something as locals.
If we're talking the entire ground floor of a building or most of the ground floor of a building, that doesn't really lend itself to that type of business anyways. It's something that needs the actual space rather than just a booth in a parking lot, which I think is what a lot of like that kind of business needs. So we're probably not looking at that anyways. But no, I think rental space, I think places I'm trying to think of, business owners I know who have had trouble finding space in the past, offices, salons, tattoo parlors, apothecaries, storefronts, things like that.
Factory. I always enjoy those.
What'd you say, Ruben? I didn't hear you.
A chocolate factory. Probably part about any tourist destination.
Fudge.
Chocolate. Fudge, yeah.
So that actually brings up an interesting question. We already have in the RC no large box stores. Is there any sort of limit that can be placed on chain or non-chain businesses?
Nope.
Yep.
The way
I just figured we'd get that ask, so I want to.
And I went through that in Park City, and the way we got around it is to keep like the big retailers from coming in, like Eddie Bauer's or REI or whatever on Main Street. Not that they would go there because they can't get a space big enough. Was to limit the size of any one business.
In that case, I would like a Chipotle on the first floor of somewhere.
Well, we can't really do that. We can't go that far.
Oh, I know. Just a plug in case anyone's listening. my favorite and only chain place.
If we set the right requirements.
I don't know. I like bagels. We could go for some bagels.
Some restaurant types of uses.
I think it's
just thinking about what we hear persistently in the community about places they can't find a space for but would like a space for.
I think daycares are huge. I think we need daycares really badly.
We do.
The RC zone.
Well, if we're not getting them anywhere else. I mean, eventually we might be able to get them in the C2 or C3, but I think the property values are just too far up there. Mm-hmm. So I think unless we require or again incentivize it out here, it's not going to happen unless somebody wants to give their property to somebody who wants to do a daycare. It's all based upon how much the property costs and what it takes to run and build, and do the numbers work. And they don't right now for things like daycare unless they've owned the property a long, long time.
I think if we're talking RC zone, I think the most appropriate uses are things, going back to reducing congestion downtown. What are things that people need? I think leaving it broad, like restaurants, cafes, rental shops, retail stores. Like, I think that is pretty much sums it up as far as, laundry, I think would be a good addition
Yeah.
as well. But like,
We also don't,
somewhere locals are going to drive out to really to go run an errand.
we also don't want to compete with Main Street.
Yeah.
So, we have to be a little bit careful there.
Yeah. I guess I don't
have in town.
specific about like a bunch of type of businesses that have to be out there. I think, just thinking more of like what would reduce congestion with tourism, maybe like everybody running into town for coffee and breakfast or whatever it may be.
A bagel.
Making the more local desired shops in town.
Or drive-in coffee places.
Oh, God.
We're on the out, so people aren't driving into town. Starbucks. I mean, Wicked Brew, but that's on the other end of town.
Yeah, the whole drive-through discussion has been an interesting one over the years, but
What about a drive-in movie theater?
That would be awesome.
I think it'd be
So-
sweet.
I agree. And maybe for a temporary use, that makes sense. I think the way property values are, there's no way that anybody's going to do that because they can't make any money at it probably, or not much. But I think it's a great idea.
Incorporate it with their hotel in the floodplain in the back, where it's not usable.
That's
Like,
possible.
Considering theaters are not going to ever return to really what they were, that's maybe not a bad idea.
Yeah, it's not.
I think trailer parking is a good addition to this zone too, for another use,
Mhm.
getting them, parked north of town would be good.
Yeah, we talked about that being a allowed use if it's secured and monitored.
Get those rental RVs off Main Street. They're so hazardous.
Oh, it's awful, I know.
What's all the area used for? Right across from Archway Inn. Or is that pretty uphill? I was looking. I don't really have a reference because that map that you guys showed and then Corey explained, that was pretty good at looking at. But just like sky blue thinking about parking spaces makes a lot of sense. But
Like offsite, like
outside
like
of town.
like for larger.
Yeah.
Yeah, vehicles. Again, not a big profit margin for property owners. But it's not a bad idea.
I think getting it into where they can do that with, other things to utilize all their property, would be something that would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Working.
Okay. What
Trying
else?
to think people buy property for money. I can't think of anything.
Luke, do you have any ideas?
Not anything that hasn't been thrown out already.
All right.
5% is pretty small. Did we decide on that? That we like that?
We could up it for sure if you wish.
I was just thinking, maybe I can't visualize it good enough, but I'm trying to, okay, so you would have 5% of your open space if you're less than 2 acres going towards, or civic space, and then 5% goes to commercial, right?
Yeah, 5% commercial. So if you're talking about a 40,000 square foot project, 5% would be 5,000 square feet, right?
So would you get
Be 2,000, I think.
2,000.
2,000? But that's 2,000 towards civic space and 2,000 towards that, because it's 5% of the, okay. I think I
We'll have
gotcha.
to figure out what we do with the civic space. That's
Yeah.
That's another discussion.
Okay. And 2,000 square feet, but that still feels small.
It's very small. Yeah.
It's very small.
And, you know, that's what most hotels have in them.
Okay.
Just, you know, things that every hotel has.
There it goes.
So if we want to up it to 10, I think that's perfectly appropriate. What do you guys think about that?
If we up it to 10, I'd like to require that it's also open to the main street or to the bike path, like situated on the ground floor, and definitely open to the public and like with a sign, and not just exclusively for the people who are staying in the hotel.
Okay.
That's the sweet.
That's a good idea. So I quite frankly have not had an awful lot of time to spend on overnight accommodations in the last few months. Things are really crazy busy with other things. But I do intend to move this forward. And but on some of the other things like the energy efficiency, we need to do some legwork on that before we can bring it back to you. And hopefully things will loosen up a little bit. You know, we're real short staffed. I'm doing all the code compliance as well as everything else. For those of you who don't know, we laid off 70 people or furloughed 70 people as part of all this. And we have no money. So we're really running on, we just don't have much capacity as a staff. We also there are a couple annexations that we think we're going to see, annexation requests that we think we're going to see here that we've been talking to people about, and those take a lot of time. So just a heads up, it's not that I don't think this is important and the council doesn't think it's important. It's a capacity issue right now. And we are bringing back a couple people from furlough, hopefully either at the end of the month or before that. So that'll help a little bit. So we'll do what we can with the resources that we have. Corey and I both work all day long, every day. I do a lot of screen time. Corey's at least back in the office.
We're very glad you're both here, so thank you. And Summer, you too. We're glad all of you got to remain.
Yeah. I don't know, Summer, do you know if City Council if you're there, do you know if City Council is thinking about going to open meetings again yet or no? She's off doing something else. And they are not talking about doing, you know, on-site meetings yet either. I am not going to go back to work in the office for a while. I'm going to continue to telecommute because I have really compromised lungs and I'm old. So I really don't want to be sick. And Chuck and I are going to continue to work from home. And then there are a couple other people who want the flexibility to do that at times. So we will probably continue to have some form of Zoom meeting, even if it gets to a point where we can do an in-person meeting. Right now, I still don't think it's a good idea.
Nora, I got the impression from City Council that they weren't in a hurry to start in-person meetings. And part of the problem is that with social distancing and trying to keep people separated in the council chambers, you then start to run out of space. And so then your open meeting becomes not so open because you can't have as many people in there. So I kind of got the impression that they were, as long as we were in yellow, that we were probably going to continue having meetings this way, mainly because we can't separate. We just have a difficult time separating people in the council chambers to meet social distancing requirements.
I mean, I would rather meet like this than sit in a room and wear face masks, personally.
I agree.
I mean, I'm getting pretty used to face masks, but you know, just a heads up. So anything else you guys want to talk about? You have given us some great input and I really appreciate it. Ruben.
Are we done with the aesthetics and design as far as overnight accommodations go? Or can we introduce anything?
No, we can definitely talk about that. And we can put that down. We can schedule it for a work session next time.
Okay.
Yeah. We can do that if we want to go back to aesthetics and design. That might be a nice little break from all the numbers, nitty-gritty stuff.
I really liked that spreadsheet that you made that had it all lined out. Like, I think you had like building requirements, aesthetics that we worked on quite some time ago.
Yeah.
We could have
Yeah.
that again for the next meeting, and then it just gives me a visual on like, okay,
Yeah.
you know, we are where we're going, what we're done with, and
I can certainly go back to the matrix format. It worked well for discussion purposes. You know, eventually we have to actually put it into code, so that's why we did that. But I can go back to that if it makes it easier for you. It's not hard.
yeah, I liked it. And
Okay.
I understand you guys are busy and short-staffed, and I appreciate all that you do. I would like to see us to continue to wrap this up. I mean, we've got like 3 more zones to get through. Hopefully, maybe when we're finished with this one, it will create some kind of template and help us, you know, focus what we want in those more community-driven local areas, you know, walking versus being north of town, just to, you know, people want to know.
C2 and C3 are the next big ones that we need
Yeah,
to.
I think Becky's right. I think once we have a template, hopefully it should be easy. We'll just say, well, okay, what are the characteristics we want to preserve or incentivize in this zone? Let's add it to the metric we already have.
Right.
Yeah, we can use that same matrix that you made, and maybe it'll.
Yeah, the scale will probably be generally different because there aren't a lot of huge lots left in town. There's some, but most of them are smaller.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, anybody?
Hmm.
Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right.
Sorry.
Let's adjourn our meeting at 7:24 p.m.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Rest of your week.